It is 10 o'clock on Christmas Eve, 1968. The house is quiet, settling into the deep, heavy silence of a British winter night. Upstairs in the box room, it is freezing. The air is so cold you can see your own breath pluming in the darkness above the heavy eiderdown quilt. But you are not asleep. You're lying rigid, eyes wide open, listening. You're listening for the sound of hooves on the roof tiles. You're smelling the faint, magical drift coming from downstairs, a mixture of cold smoke from the dying fire, the sharp tang of pine needles, and the sweet, heavy scent of the sherry left out on the hearth. At the end of your bed, there is no red felt boot bought from a supermarket. There is a white cotton pillowcase taken from the airing cupboard, pinned hopefully to the blanket. It hangs there, empty and flat in the moonlight, waiting for the magic to happen. This was a time when the magic didn't come from a credit card. It came from patience, from the cold and from the dark. To understand why these memories burn so brightly in the British psyche, one must first understand the landscape in which they were forged. The Christmas of the mid-20th century was not a 3-month commercial marathon, it was a sprint. Today, the festive season begins to creep onto the shelves as soon as the Halloween pumpkins are cleared away. But in the 1950s and 60s, the world remained resolutely ordinary until December arrived. There was no Christmas creep. This compressed time frame created a pressure cooker of anticipation that is almost impossible to replicate today. This was the era of the magic of waiting. For a child, the countdown didn't begin with a television ad. It began with a piece of cardboard. The Advent calendar. These calendars were not thick boxes filled with plastic and cheap confectionery. They were flat illustrated scenes, often a snowy Victorian village or a nativity. Behind the door was a picture, just a picture. Yet the thrill of opening that tiny paper door to reveal a picture of a holly wreath was palpable. It was a daily measured dose of magic. It taught a generation the exquisite agony of patience. This patience was necessary because the world outside was not a wonderland of abundance. We must remember that the parents of the 60s and 70s were the children of the 40s. They had been raised on rationing. Even though the coupons were gone, the mindset of scarcity remained. Treats were not everyday items. In a modern supermarket, you can buy a box of dates or a tin of biscuits on a Tuesday in July. In 1965, these things were seasonal rarities. Nuts, fizzy pop, often delivered by the pop man in glass bottles, boxes of chocolates, and even certain fruits were markers of the season. They appeared in the house only once a year. This scarcity imbued every object with a radiant significance. A bottle of sherry wasn't just alcohol, it was the spirit of Christmas bottled. A bowl of nuts wasn't just a snack, it was a symbol of plenty in a lean year. The contrast was the key. The rest of the year was often drab, functional and disciplined. Christmas was the vivid technicolor explosion that interrupted the grey. And nowhere was this transformation more physical and more labour-intensive than in the decorations. The transformation of the British home was not a design project. It was a ritual of excavation. Sometime around mid-December, the box would come down. It contained the ghost of every Christmas past, tangled together in a heap of tinsel and wire. Decorating the house was a manual labour of love. In an era before cheap plastic garlands filled the supermarket aisles, decorations were often made, not bought. This was the golden age of the paper chain. Whole evenings were spent at the kitchen table, licking the gummed ends of paper strips until your tongue tasted of bitter adhesive, or dipping them into homemade flour and water glue that dried like concrete. These chains weren't draped tastefully on the tree. They were pinned, aggressively, into the plaster of the ceiling. They crisscrossed the living room from corner to corner, sagging slightly in the middle, lowering the ceiling and turning the room into a vibrant, claustrophobic paper grotto. Then there were the foil decorations, concertina garlands that pulled out like accordions, pinned to the picture rails. They rustled when the door opened, they caught the smoke from the fire and the cigarettes, and in the corner, the centrepiece, the tree. For many it was a real Norway spruce, bought from a greengrocer or a man with a van. It had a smell that defined the month, a sharp, resinous scent of pine. But it also had a fatal flaw. Within 3 days of entering the warm living room, it would begin to shed. By Christmas Eve, the carpet was a minefield of sharp needles that no vacuum cleaner could ever truly conquer. But for the modern, forward-thinking family of the 1960s, there was the alternative. the silver aluminium tree. It was the height of chic. It didn't pretend to be a tree, it was a sculpture of tinsel and wire. It was reusable, it was clean, and it reflected the lights with a disco ball intensity. And speaking of lights, the fairy lights. These were not the delicate LED strings of today. These were large screw-in bulbs shaped like pine cones or lanterns. They ran on a series circuit, a piece of electrical engineering designed to break the human spirit. If one bulb blew, they all went out. The annual ritual of checking the bulbs was a father's burden, sitting in the dark, swapping a spare bulb in and out of 20 different sockets, muttering under his breath, until suddenly, magically, the string burst into life. The ornaments were not plastic, they were glass, thin, fragile, terrifyingly delicate glass baubles, often inherited from a grandmother. To drop one was a tragedy. It shattered into 1,000 dusting powder shards that vanished into the carpet. When it was done, the transformation was total. Because the rest of the house remained freezing cold, the living room became the absolute magnetic hub of the family. The decorations seemed to insulate the room, trapping the heat and the light. You didn't just look at the decorations, you lived inside them. With the stage set, the house transformed, and the waiting almost over, the stage was set for the day itself. And it began not with a bang, but with the heavy weight of a pillowcase on your toes. The morning rituals, the magic of a mid-century Christmas morning, began in the dark, and it was defined by specific tactile sensations that have largely vanished from the modern world. 1. The anatomy of the stocking. Today, a stocking is often a pre-filled, branded sack of plastic toys. Back then, it was a piece of domestic engineering. It was usually one of your father's woolen work socks, or a white pillowcase stretched to its limit. And the contents followed a strict unwritten national constitution. At the very bottom, in the toe, was the anchor, the satsuma, or mandarin or tangerine. In the 1960s, citrus fruit in winter was still exotic. It was wrapped in silver foil or orange tissue paper. Peeling it in the dark, the spray of zest created the definitive smell of Christmas morning. A sharp citrus burst in a cold, stale bedroom. Next to it, the walnut, a single, rock-hard nut that no child had the strength or the tools to crack. It often survived until Easter. Then, the sugar mouse. A solid lump of pink or white fondant, sickly sweet, with a piece of cotton string for a tail. And finally, in the heel, a coin, a shiny new penny, or perhaps a sixpence. These items were humble. They were small, but in the grey light of dawn, discovering them felt like unearthing pirate treasure. 2. The annual ritual. If the stocking was the starter, the main course of the morning was a heavy, rectangular hardback book, the Christmas Annual. Whether it was the Beano, the Dandy, Bunty or Blue Peter, every British child received one. They had a distinct, intoxicating smell, the scent of high-gloss paper and fresh ink. The ritual was specific. You sat up in bed, wearing your dressing gown over your pyjamas, breath clouding in the cold air, and you read it from cover to cover before your parents even woke up. It was a private world of Dennis the Menace or the Four Marys, a quiet hour of literacy before the chaos began. 3. The selection box. This was the holy grail of confectionery. But it didn't look like the plastic trays of today. A 1960s selection box was a thing of beauty. It was a flat cardboard box, and the front was covered in a white plastic netting. Through the mesh, you could see them, 6 or 7 full-size chocolate bars, a Mars bar, a Crunchie, a packet of Spangles. They weren't fun size. They were real, and the box itself was a toy. On the back, printed on the cardboard, was a board game, usually Snakes and Ladders or Ludo. You had to cut out counters from the side flaps. The packaging was as important as the chocolate. 4. The sound of real carols. In the weeks leading up to the day, and sometimes on the morning itself, there was a sound at the door. Not a delivery driver, but a choir. Carol singing was not the knock and run begging it sometimes is today. It was often local church groups, the Salvation Army band or neighbours. They stood in the snow or the rain holding lanterns and they sang God Rest Ye Merry, gentlemen with full harmonies. You opened the door, the heat of the house rushing out to meet the cold, and you listened. Then the ritual, inviting them in for a mince pie or a small glass of sherry. It was a moment of genuine community, a musical connection between the warmth of the home and the cold of the street. 5. The morning pub visit. This is perhaps the most alien memory to the modern mind. Around noon, while the mother stayed home to wrestle with a massive, uncooperative turkey in a non-fan-assisted oven, the father would often disappear. Just nipping out for a swift one, he'd say. He was going to the pub. On Christmas morning, the local pub was packed. It was a strange, condensed opening hour, filled with men in their best sweaters, escaping the heat of the kitchen. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and beer. For the children, this meant sitting in the family room, or sometimes in the car with a packet of crisps and a bottle of lemonade with a straw, waiting for Dad to finish his pint. It wasn't neglect, it was tradition. A brief masculine interlude before the domestic duty of carving began. These morning rituals were the prelude. They were the quiet, intimate moments before the sheer, overwhelming sensory overload of the main event. The main event, if the morning was about anticipation, the afternoon was about endurance. The British Christmas dinner was not just a meal, it was an industrial process of consumption. 6. The culinary endurance test. The centrepiece was, of course, the turkey. But in the 1960s, cooking a turkey was a high-stakes gamble. Without modern timers or fan ovens, the bird was often subjected to a brutal hours-long roasting until it was drier than the Sahara. But the real memories lie in the trimmings, the Brussels sprouts. They were put on to boil sometime in November. By the time they reached the plate, they were grey, mushy spheres of sulphurous disappointment. Every child had to eat one. It was the law. The bread sauce, a uniquely British beige porridge flavoured with cloves and onion. To a child it was inexplicable, to an adult essential, and finally the danger lurking in the dessert, the Christmas pudding, black heavy, smelling of brandy. Hidden inside was a silver sixpence, or later a 5p piece, wrapped in greaseproof paper. We didn't worry about health and safety. We worried about who would find the money and who would crack a molar. 7. The 3 p.m. silence. At 5 minutes to 3, the atmosphere changed. The chaotic clearing of plates stopped. The washing up was abandoned. The family moved to the living room. The father checked his watch. Quiet now. She's on. For 10 minutes, the entire nation stopped. The Queen's speech was not background noise. It was a mandatory briefing. In some houses, particularly in the 1950s, people actually stood up when the national anthem played. It was a solemn, monochromatic moment of connection with the state, a reminder that you were part of something bigger than just your living room. 8. The impossible tea. This is the greatest mystery of the British Christmas. Having eaten a massive roast dinner at 1 p.m, and pudding at 2 p.m, by 5 p.m. the table was laid again. It was Christmas tea. The big light went on. The best tiered cake stand came out. And out came the spread. Cold ham, a pork pie, a jar of piccalilli, pickled onions, a trifle with sponge fingers soaked in sherry, and the Christmas cake, which was just the pudding, but with hard icing. No one was hungry. Everyone groaned. But everyone ate it. It was the gluttonous victory lap of the day. 9. The national hearth. Morecambe and Wise. If the Queen ruled the afternoon, Eric and Ernie ruled the evening. In the 1970s, the Morecambe Wise Christmas Special wasn't just a TV show. It was a cultural monolith. Picture this. 28 million people watching the same channel. That is half the population. There were no remotes to fight over, no second screens, no streaming. The entire country sat in the dark, illuminated by the box, laughing at the exact same moment as Andre Previn, Andrew Preview, tried to play the piano. The next morning on Boxing Day, you didn't ask, did you see it? You asked, wasn't it good? It was the ultimate shared experience. 10. The Boxing Day come down. The day after. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a lethargic contentment. This day had two specific flavours. The first was bubble and squeak. The leftover potatoes and cabbage, fried in a pan until crispy and brown. For many, this tasted better than the actual Christmas dinner. The second was the walk. Regardless of the weather, regardless of the children's desire to play with their new toys, the family was marched out of the house. Blow away the cobwebs, the father would say. It was a grey, damp trudge through a park or along a seafront, wearing new scarves, walking off the excess of the day before. These 10 memories form the spine of the classic British Christmas. It was a festival defined by specific tastes, strict timings, and a profound sense of togetherness. But as the 1970s rolled on, the glue that held this world together, the scarcity, the limited technology, and the patience began to dissolve. The peak of this communal experience was about to pass. The mid-1970s marked the absolute high watermark of the traditional British Christmas. It was the peak of the communal experience. To look back at the statistics of Christmas 1977 is to look at a different planet. On that day, 135,000 people sat down to watch the Morecambe Wise Christmas show. Let that sink in. More than half the entire population of the United Kingdom was doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. There were no video recorders to time shift it. There was no catch-up TV. There were no mobile phones to scroll through during the boring bits. You had to be there. This created a density of atmosphere that is impossible to replicate in our fragmented modern world. The television set had become the electronic hearth. In a house that might still be chilly in the hallways, the TV provided both light and warmth. The room was a pressure cooker of shared emotion. When a joke landed, the laughter wasn't just in your living room. You knew it was echoing in the house next door and the house next to that. It was a national campfire. This unity extended to the gifts. In the mid-70s, the blockbuster toy was still in its infancy. Gifts were still largely modest, tactile, and shared. It was the golden age of the board game. Mastermind, Connect, Four, Buckaroo. These weren't solitary experiences. You couldn't play Kerplunk on your own. The gifts themselves demanded interaction. They forced the family to sit together on the carpet, engaging in high-stakes, low-tech warfare. The scarcity mindset of the post-war years was fading, but it hadn't yet been replaced by excess. A bicycle was a main present that you waited 3 years for. A cassette recorder was a piece of high technology shared by siblings. The magic of waiting was still intact. The shops closed on Christmas Eve and didn't open again for days. If you forgot the batteries, you waited. If you ran out of bread, you ate crackers. The world stopped. But even as Angela Rippon danced across the screen in 1977, the seeds of a radical shift were being sown. Two forces were approaching that would shatter this communal huddle forever. One was technological, and the other was commercial. The 1980s were coming, and they were bringing a very different kind of Christmas. The turning point for the British Christmas wasn't a specific year, but a shift in temperature, both cultural and physical. The physical shift was the widespread arrival of central heating. Throughout the early 80s, radiators conquered the British home. The ice on the windows vanished. The freezing bedrooms became warm. This sounds like progress, and it was. But it killed the huddle. Families no longer needed to congregate in the one warm room. The teenagers could retreat to their bedrooms to listen to their new Walkmans. The dad could go to the study. The physical gravity that pulled the family together was broken by the luxury of warmth. Simultaneously, the commercial temperature skyrocketed. This was the arrival of the must-have toy. In the late 70s and early 80s, a new anxiety entered the parents' life, the panic buy. It started with Star Wars figures, then the Rubik's Cube, then the Cabbage Patch Kids. Suddenly, Christmas wasn't about the simple joy of a Satsuma and a comic annual. It was about securing the specific plastic artifact that every other child had. The magic of waiting was replaced by the stress of acquiring. And then came the ultimate disruptor, the home computer, the ZX Spectrum, the Commodore 64. For the first time, the main present was a screen. It was a solitary portal. The board games, which required 4 people and a lot of shouting, were pushed into the cupboard. The communal laughter of Morecambe Wise was replaced by the solitary beep-beep of Jet Set Willy. The focus shifted from we to me. The shared experience began to fracture. Channel 4 arrived in 1982, splitting the audience. Video recorders allowed us to time shift, killing the simultaneous national viewing. The big silence of 3 p.m. began to erode as alternative entertainment became available. By the mid-80s, the Christmas of the 60s, that quiet, cold, patient, communal festival, was effectively over. It had been replaced by something louder, warmer, and infinitely more expensive. The Satsuma was still there, but it was no longer a prize, it was just fruit. The contrast between the Christmas of memory and the Christmas of today is stark. We have gained comfort, but we have lost the season. Today, Christmas is a marathon. It begins in November with Black Friday, an imported American festival of spending that has nothing to do with Sherry or Robbins. The magic of waiting is dead. In the age of Amazon Prime, if you want something, you have it tomorrow. The agonizing, exquisite longing for a box of chocolates or a specific toy, cultivated over weeks of window shopping, has vanished. The stocking, that humble sock of wonders, has been gentrified. The shiny penny and the walnut have been replaced by expensive tech accessories and chocolate coins that taste like wax. The satsuma is still included, a bewildered relic of a vitamin-deficient past, often found rotting under the bed in January because no modern child considers fruit a treat. The communal TV event is a ghost. A hit Christmas show today gets 6 or 7 million viewers, not 28 million. We are physically in the same room, but digitally we are in different universes. And then there is the loss of the thank you letter. It was a mandatory ritual, the thank you letter. It taught gratitude, penmanship, and social obligation. Today, a text message with a Santa emoji suffices, if that. The physical artifact of gratitude has disappeared. We have also lost the boredom. The 1960s Christmas involved long stretches of profound boredom, waiting for the turkey, waiting for the Queen, waiting for the shops to reopen. But in that boredom, creativity thrived. Games were invented, stories were told, relationships were navigated. Today, boredom is illegal. If a lull occurs, a screen is instantly activated to fill the void. We have optimized the holiday for entertainment, but in doing so, we have removed the quiet spaces where the memories used to live. But the most profound loss is not the silence, nor the patience. It is the death of the treat. The aftermath of the 20th century Christmas is a culture of permanent abundance that has quietly eroded the definition of special. In the 1960s, a fizzy drink was a Christmas event. A whole chocolate bar was a birthday luxury. A roasted bird was a feast. Today, we eat Christmas food all year round. We drink wine on Tuesdays. We eat chocolate whenever we feel a pang of boredom. We have democratized luxury to the point where it has ceased to be luxurious. When you can have anything you want at any moment, the spike of joy that comes from a simple satsuma in a sock is chemically impossible to replicate. We have flattened the emotional landscape. We have also lost the national soundtrack. In the 70s, you heard Merry Xmas Everybody by Slade on the radio or on Top of the Pops in the few weeks leading up to the day. It was an anthem that triggered a Pavlovian response of excitement. Now, the Christmas playlist begins in retail parks in early November. By December 25th, we are numb to it. The music has become background radiation, a tool for retail coercion rather than a signal of celebration. And what of the weather? It is a small point, perhaps, but the true Briton memory is often cold. It is defined by the frost on the inside of the window. As our winters have grown warmer and wetter, the Dickensian atmosphere has evaporated. The modern Christmas is often a grey, mild, rainy affair. We have lost the elemental battle against the cold that made the warmth of the living room so intoxicating. We are left with a holiday that is louder, brighter, and vastly more expensive, yet somehow feels thinner. We chase the ghost of that feeling, the feeling of the 1968 Christmas Eve, by spending more money, buying bigger TVs, and hanging more lights. But the feeling remains elusive, because you cannot buy the feeling of a sixpence in a pudding. You cannot purchase the silence of a street where everyone is watching the same show. We have traded the magic of the rare for the convenience of the available, and in doing so, we have turned a magical shared season into just another day off. When we look back at these 10 memories, the satsuma in the sock, the sixpence in the pudding, the paper chains pasted with flour, they can seem incredibly humble. To a modern eye, they might even look poor, but those who were there know the truth. We weren't poor. We were rich in the things that actually mattered. We didn't have central heating, so we had to huddle together. We didn't have 100 TV channels, so we all laughed at the same jokes. We didn't have endless treats, so a single chocolate bar felt like a treasure. The magic of the mid-century British Christmas wasn't found in the abundance. It was found in the scarcity. It was the contrast between the grey, hard world outside and the warm, bright sanctuary we built inside. It was a magic born of patience, of waiting, and of making an effort. We cannot go back to that world. We wouldn't want to give up our warm bedrooms or our easy lives. But there is a reason these memories ache with such a specific sweetness. They remind us of a time when the best gift wasn't something you could buy in a shop. The best gift was simply the day itself, the heat of the fire and the people sitting around it. The Satsuma wasn't just fruit, it was gold. And the silence of the snow falling on the roof was the only soundtrack we needed.